Welcome back. Today, we are in the second part of a series called Pointing the Finger, and we're talking about judgment. Judgment, I got this on Amazon. Judgment. When I say judging, now judging is one of those huge terms, right? There's so many things that fall under the category of judgment. What I'm talking about is when I feel the need to look at your behavior or your view or something you've done, right? Assess the situation and deliver a verdict, right? Come to a conclusion. Now, why are we talking about this? Well, last week when we opened up the series, what we said was that there was this huge study done by a group called the Barna Group, and they do things like this, where they survey people inside and outside of the church, and what they found was that when asked to describe the church in one word, people outside the church said something, some form, over 90% of the people said some form of the word judgmental. What we talked about last week was how Jesus said that he was forming a group, an assembly, and a congregation, a movement of people who would be for people, who would be known by their love, known what they're for, not what they're against. And so we're talking about this. If you're somebody who considers themselves a church person or a follower of Jesus, then this is too important for us to not talk about. But if you're someone who is not a church person, like maybe you were dragged here or threatened or you don't want to be here, you just can't wait till this is going to be over so you can go to lunch, right? If that's you, maybe this is why you don't like church. Maybe this is why you left church however many years ago. Because you ran into some people who said that they were Christians and came off as very, very judgmental. The good news is that the version of Christianity that Jesus presented to the world was not described using this word. But the other thing is, like, whether you are a follower of Jesus or not, right now in the society that we live in, I don't know if you've realized, but we're in a little bit of a blame game, right? There's a lot of finger pointing, a lot of judgment going on in our society. And because of that, people are getting defensive and divisive. And the question is, is there a better way? Is there a way we can interact with each other that doesn't end in broken relationships, in division, in sides? Is there a better way? Is there an alternative? And my hope is that, in looking through these teachings of Jesus, we will see, no matter where you are in the realm of faith, we will see that there really is a better way. So last week we talked about really the foundation for this entire series. Really the what we have to build on here. We said, what we said was that we were looking at 4 keys. If there could be a good kind of judgment, we're looking at 4 keys to good judgment, or 4 ways to avoid the blame game, right? And we said the first thing, what we need to start with is the word why. When you or I feel the need to make a judgment, to criticize, to assess something, and deliver a verdict, we need to ask why. We looked at a passage where the Apostle Paul said that everything we do should be done in love. And this includes judgment. And so if love is a little bit abstract for you, the simple question we can ask is, if I'm going to get on someone's case or point something out or draw a conclusion, right, make a judgment, the simple, very practical question we can ask is, am I judging for the good of the judged? Do I actually care about their well-being? Is this coming from a place of love, or am I just, I don't like that, and boom, I'm delivering a verdict? Right? This is the starting point for a better way. We need to be asking why, and that's the foundation, really, that's step 1, really, of this series. And I think what you'll see is if you stop and just ask, before you criticize, before you make a judgment, before you draw a conclusion, just stop and be like, am I concerned for this person? Do I actually care about their good? Or am I trying to make a point? So much will just fall into place. So that was last week. This week, we're on the second key, or second way to avoid the blame game. I'll tell you a little story, but you can't hold this story against me, all right? So when I was in high school, which is the way a lot of my bad stories start out, When I was in high school, I was getting ready for bed one night. I was in the bathroom. I had brushed my teeth, washed my face, doing my thing or whatever. And I was flossing. And then I had the floss in my hands. And I just thought, random thought, could I get this floss up my nose and out my mouth? Curious, right? So I tried. So I unrolled my cinnamon floss, red cinnamon floss, unrolled it and just started feeding it up there. And if you've ever tried to snake anything through anything, it's got to have some integrity, right? And this thing is just it's getting stopped up here, and I'm pushing and pushing and pushing, and I'm just keep going and going, and I'm trying to get it up there, and I'm all by myself and eventually it goes up, but it took the end that I was holding with it, and so it was gone. And at first I'm oh, okay, this stinks. And I went, and explained it to my mom. And she couldn't believe it, but she kind of wasn't surprised. So she had me over a pot, trying to breathe in steam. We're looking up there, trying to figure out all this crazy stuff. And then eventually you know what, forget it. I'm just gonna go to bed. So I went to sleep. And then I went to school the next day, and I'm thinking, at this point, I'm still pretty much having a good time, it's just dumb, but it's kind of funny, so I'm telling my friends. And my mom decides to call the school nurse, and she's okay, so this is what my son did, and is it okay? And the school nurse said, no, that could cause an infection. You need to go figure this out, go get it out. And so I'm in Spanish class, and all of a sudden, someone knocks at the door, and I'm yanked out of school, and I have to go to the emergency room. And I'm still kind of having a good time, right? Because now I don't have to go to class. So they bring me to the hospital, and it's one of those situations where, one nurse calls the other nurse in, look at this guy. And I'm in the bed, and I still don't know exactly what's going to happen. And I'm having a good time until they took out this tool. This long, black, snake-like thing with a little camera on the end of it. And they told me they were going to stick it in my face. And then I, wasn't having fun anymore. It was wait a minute. Hold on, right? And so they explained to me, okay, here's what we got to do. They gave me an explanation. And they moved, very slowly and very carefully as they weave this thing through my face. And it turns out, yes, there is a connection between the nose and the mouth. You could do that. I saw the camera come out of my mouth after it went up into my nose. P.S., they never found it. So I probably swallowed it. Or I don't know. But it was a long time ago. I'm okay. So what's my point? Okay, there's a point to the story. My point is, I was having a good time until I felt like they were getting up in my business, right? Until they were in my face. Then I was whoa, hold on a second. Slow down. Have you ever had somebody touch your face? Just reach out and touch your face. It's a little you're in my bubble, It's a little uncomfortable. And our first response is typically hey, hold on a second. What are you doing, right? Have you ever had someone criticize you? Look at something that you're doing or a way you think or something you said and get on your case about it. What's interesting is that, at least if you're like me, the two responses are often the same as when someone reaches for my face. You want to start talking about what I'm doing. It's whoa, I feel vulnerable. You're getting all up in my business. It's hold on a second. Slow down. Right? What I think is amazing is in one of his most profound metaphors, Jesus compares judging people to getting in their face. And in just thinking about that alone, there are so many points that we can come away with from this little metaphor here. But if nothing else, it can give us some really, really practical guidance, some practical advice. And I think what you'll see is at the end of this story, the end of this little passage, explanation, there's a twist. And I think the twist is what really packs the punch of this whole passage, this whole lesson. And so here's what he says. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye. So this is someone you're like living life with. Could be a brother, could be a member of the community, somebody you feel close with. And apparently there's a speck of sawdust in his eye. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Now, he's using hyperbole, right? But he's talking about a huge 2x4. Apparently, these people are woodworkers. He's like, you see someone with a speck, and you feel the need to focus on that, and yet you miss the plank. Now, if this is like pandemic world and you got a plank in your eye, you take that plank out and you sell it because wood is worth a lot of money right now, right? But that's not what he's talking about. He says, what he's talking about is our perspective. Our perspective. Think about your last issue, your last conflict. The last time there was like something off in an interpersonal relationship. What happened? What happened? If you're like me, it was something that somebody else did. Like that's how I see it at least. In my story, like in the movie of my life, I'm the main character in my story, right? I'm the good guy. I'm the protagonist, and I'm just going through life, just being nice and doing good things, and then all of a sudden the villain enters and just messes everything up, right? That's how most of us tend to view our problems. Somebody else barges in with their issue, their opinion, their thoughts, their conclusions, and all of a sudden and what Jesus is saying here is that we see more naturally the faults of others. It has to do with our perspective. I have two little kids, Mia and Logan. And you know what's interesting? They're young, 6 and 4. Anytime I hear 7 and 5. Anytime I hear like a bang in the house or like a crash or a scream or the sound of skin hitting skin, right away I'm like, what happened? And if Mia answers, you know what the first word out of her mouth is? Logan. Okay. Logan, what happened? Well, Mia, right, it's a perspective thing. He's saying we see the issues of other people and we miss what's going on with it. We see their faults. Then he goes on and he says, how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your own eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? In the original language, the word here is behold. It's like, but look, there is a plank. So how can you say that he or she needs to fix something? His point here is that we tend to see the faults of others. And if there is a problem, the problem is on their end. We see their fault and expect them to be fixed, right? And so if you step back here, it's pretty clear. Jesus' point is that in these interpersonal issues, when we feel the need to point the finger and condemn people, I have plenty of fault. And I have plenty to fix. There's a lot I can do. Now this is important. We have to stop here for a second. If you're like most people on Long Island and in the Northeast, church people and non-church people, you may see God as the cosmic rule giver, the judge who is primarily concerned with everybody's moral uprightness, and that's what matters most. Right? That's how a lot of people see God, like the judge is just ready to drop the hammer. And so if you hear my point, right, you hear what Jesus says, I have more fault than I realize and more than I could fix than I realize. And God is a cosmic rule giver who is most concerned about my moral uprightness. Then what does that make me feel? It makes me feel guilt, right? Well, okay, I guess I'm just bad. And actually that creates distance between me and the person that I'm having the little, wood sawdust plank exchange with. Guilt. But if Jesus came to show us a better way, not an easier way, but a better way. If like he said, we talked about last week, he said the whole world would recognize us by our love, by the way we treat one another. At one point, he said, if you're going into the temple, like their religious place, and you're going to go do something super spiritual, like offer a sacrifice, but you remember you have an issue with someone, stop right there and go fix that issue. If you see Jesus like that, like someone who prioritizes relationships, people and wants us to do the same, then me hearing I have more fault than I realize and more that I could fix than I realize, then that doesn't make me feel guilt. It shows me that I have more control, more power than I realize. There is more that I can do to fix this than I realize. My slice of the pie might be bigger than I realize, but I will never own that if I am so concerned about the thing that you did and I'm just waiting for you to do it and I'm ready to make a judgment if you don't, right? There is more that we can do than we often realize. I'll give you an example. So this week, actually, I heard a story about a boy who's playing basketball, and there was someone on his team who wouldn't pass him the ball. And so he was like, that's it, I'm done. I'm not passing him the ball. And he goes and tells his dad, he's like, I'm not passing that kid the ball anymore. He doesn't pass to me. And his dad was like, hold on, wait just a second. Maybe he won't pass you the ball. But what if for the next few games, you made it your job to set him up as well as you possibly could, to give him the ball at every opportunity? Maybe that would build some chemistry. Maybe there's something you can do here. So the kid wasn't thrilled, but he did it. And it worked. And instead of just dropping the hammer and be like, nope, ball hog, done. Sorry, you stink. And then make the team even worse, there was something that he could do. So my wife and I right now, we're dealing with this at home. One of our kids, I won't tell you which one, but one of them has started to be dishonest, just started lying. He or she has started lying. And there is this temptation to just drop the hammer and be like, well, liar, punishment, just keep focusing on what they are doing, right? And get all over them but at one point we just stopped and said, you know what? Is it possible that in our home we have created an environment where looking like you did the right thing is more important than telling the truth? Of admitting your flaws and owning them? Maybe we need to change the way we talk in our home. Right? Or maybe you're at home right now and there's some tension in your relationship. Maybe you feel like your husband is distant. He's always off doing things. And you could be like, you know what, he's just distant, and until he fixes himself, well, there's just no hope for us. Maybe he'd go, I don't know, talk to somebody. Maybe your slice of the pie is a little bit bigger than you realize. Maybe you're a little critical of him, right? I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. In the same way, I'm not saying that child that lies, it's okay that they're doing that. But when it comes to resolving, if that's the priority, there may be more than you realize. Maybe you're in a workplace and you feel like you're micromanaged and you're just like, oh, yeah, my boss, bad boss, micromanager, over, they stink. Or maybe you can slow down a little bit. Slow down and think okay, well, she really is on my case about a lot of things, right? Maybe I can have a conversation with her and we can talk about how the next project that I do, what can I do to make sure she feels like I'm getting the job done the way she wants it to be. Maybe instead of just dropping the hammer, instead of seeing their faults and expecting them to be fixed, we can be a little quicker to pick up the mirror and see what it is about ourselves. That I'm not excusing what's happening over there, but I think what Jesus is saying is that we are too quick. We are too quick with our judgments. We are too quick. And often, you and I have the solution to the problem that we think is the other person. And so he goes on, right? That's the issue. We're a little bit too quick. He goes on and he says, you hypocrite. Now, if you believe in angry Jesus, you're probably hearing this as a quick punch in the stomach before he makes his next point, right? But if you believe in a Jesus who was liked by the multitudes, people who flocked to him, people who his followers later came to say that he was just the embodiment of love. Maybe this isn't a quick insult. Maybe he's trying to make a point. The word hypocrite, back in that context, it literally was the noun form of the verb to pretend. He's saying there's a level of insincerity in just putting all of it on them and pretending that there's no issue with yourself. You're not going to get you anywhere. It's insincere. So he points out that it's insincere, and here's what he says. He says, first take the plank out of your own eye. And that's the directive. That's what we do. First, we assess ourselves and remove the plank from our own eye. So if last week the point was, like our first key to good judgment was start with why? Like really think, am I doing this out of concern for them? This week, it's go first. Go first. Before you drop the hammer, stop and look, okay, is there something with me that I'm not seeing here? Go first. But he's not done. He goes on and he says, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will, now pause again. Remember, if you're reading this with the lenses of believing that there is a God who is just out to get you, who just wants you to be morally upright, and your life is the quest to be the most, goodest person you can be, then you might expect him to say, and if he was articulating the way a lot of us handle this whole topic of judgment, you would expect him to say, and then you will have the moral superiority to condemn people for the problems that you don't struggle with, right? You will have earned the right to correct all the liars once you have figured out how to never lie ever, right? That's how most of us, and what's interesting is this is the part of the verse that most of us mumble over at the end, We're like, Jesus said, before you reach for the speck in my eye, make sure you get the plank in your eye, and we just kind of mum. But this is where the punch is. He doesn't say we're going to have some kind of moral superiority or the ground, the right to point it out. He says, then you will be able to see clearly, to remove the speck from your brother's eye. The implication here is that my imperfections alter the way I see what you're doing. It alters my ability to make an accurate judgment. The plank in my eye impairs my vision. In other words, we might not just say we are too quick, but too confident in the judgments we make. We come to judgments quickly and we're sure that we're right, when often the way we see things is impaired by the issues that we have. So think of it like this. Imagine somebody skips a meeting, all right? I have a meeting, and I'm let's meet at this time, and somebody skips a meeting, and they don't show up. I'm that's just disrespect. They have no respect for what we're trying to do here, for me as a person. Maybe. Or maybe, there was a flat tire or an explosive poop diaper this morning. And maybe when I went to grab the hammer, I accidentally picked up the mirror. And maybe my desire to judge them actually shows me something about myself. Maybe this whole thing is an indication to me that I've got an issue with needing to feel respected. And it has nothing to do with that. Or maybe you have a friend who always has to post their kids on Instagram. It's every time their kids, there they are, perfect smiles, everyone's just right. And you look back at your kids and it's nope, that's not what my house looks like right now, right? Yeah, and it's so easy to be yeah, you know what? She's just got to show her perfect family to the world. She just wants to be the best and rub it in everybody's face. Maybe. Or maybe she's got family that lives in another state. Grandparents that don't get to see their grandkids grow up. And maybe my feeling of inadequacy as a parent is what's causing me to drop that hammer on her, when maybe it has nothing to do with that. My plank impairs my ability to see clearly. If I have got to be the smartest person in my friend group, then anytime someone corrects me, I'm going to take it as an attack. And maybe they don't want to attack me. Maybe it has nothing to do with our relationship. Maybe I was just wrong about something. But it will show, my desire to reach for the hammer should show me that maybe there's something in my life that needs fixing. Maybe there's an issue, there's a lens that I'm seeing this through. So I told you, with every one of these keys to good judgment, right? We'll talk about when you are on the pointing end and when you are being pointed at. And so the question is, well, what do you do then when somebody comes at you with a plank in their eye and they start criticizing you for a speck? And you see the plank, like that's Jesus' point. It's obvious, it's very obvious to a lot of people, but maybe they don't. They're like, are you serious? How can you point that out at me when you got your issue, right? What do you do when the finger's pointed in your direction? Well, first, I think it's good to know that sometimes you are blamed for things that you're not guilty of because of an issue going on in that person's life. It could be something they are projecting onto you. That's a realistic thing that happens sometimes. But then sometimes there is a real speck. And maybe they're pointing out an issue in your life. And maybe they are way worse with this. Like, it's no competition. You're like, I cannot even believe you would point this out about me because it is so, maybe. But why would I let your plank stop me from handling my speck, right? Like, if there is something that is messing up my life, if there's something off, something that needs correction, why does it matter where you are with the issue if I also have the issue, no matter how big it might be? And so I would say, like, don't let someone's plank stop you from looking at your speck, from examining your speck. And lastly, if somebody comes at you with the plank in their eye, pointing out the speck in your eye, I would say it's almost never a good time to go after their plank, right? And this is why I feel like Jesus' metaphor is just brilliant on so many levels. Like, think about, you ever have someone reach into your face? Like, what do? They go slowly. What would be horrible is if someone with impaired vision came like zooming in at you super fast, and at the same time you're like, well, here I come, right? What that's going to end with is no progress on either end and hurt on both sides. And so maybe you address it later on when like things cool down a little bit. But what if we were the kind of people who were slow to judge? I think Jesus' point here is that we are too quick and we are too confident. But what if we were slow and careful? The same way you would, if you had to reach in someone's face, you would slow yourself down because you know you're getting in their business. It's a vulnerable thing, right? Here's what I'll leave you with, and then we'll wrap up. My wife the other day was on Instagram. It's a social media thing if you've never heard of it. And she's listening to this woman who likes to talk about politics and issues and all this stuff. And she's pretty vague about where she stands on certain things, but she's pretty knowledgeable. And I'm overhearing what my wife is listening to. And someone I don't know if they dialed into the show or they commented or what, but somehow they asked her a question. And she restated the question. I honestly don't remember what the question was. It could have been some stance or some issue or something somebody did. And here's what she said. She said, I don't yet know where I stand on that issue. I don't know how I feel about it yet. And it blew my mind. I was like, that is so wise, and it is so rare. We're presented something like a half-formed version of some story and some truth, and we just gotta pick. Okay, what side am I on? It's like, you ever see in the cartoons when there's a crack in the floor and then the floor starts to split and they're gonna fall down to the abyss? That's how we handle issues. They come at us and we're like, we better jump to one side quick, but there's no floor that's gonna fall out from under you, right? Like, you can sit in the middle and be slow to drop the hammer. Slow to form a judgment. Like, the middle is your friend. And I think what you'll see, like this lady on Instagram, is that there is so much wisdom in doing that. Whether it's about a political issue or something that's going on in a community or something that's going on in your family. Like, what if somebody skipped my meeting and instead of being like, that's disrespect, I was like, you know what? Hold on a second. I don't know the story. I don't yet know how I feel about that. They didn't answer my text message. I don't yet know how I feel about that. They did something that rubbed me the wrong way, but you know what? I don't yet know how I feel about that. I haven't formed an opinion on that issue. What if we were the kind of people who, we started with why? We asked and we made sure, asked ourselves and made sure that we were entering into some kind of confrontation or conversation with their best intention in mind. And then we went first. And we assessed ourselves. We picked up the mirror instead of the hammer. And thought, is there something here maybe that's causing me to feel that way? But really it's an issue with me, not with them. And in those moments when we had to reach in and do something about it, what if we went, before we got all up in their business, we went slowly and carefully? Maybe that would help us out a little bit with the blame game that's going on in our culture right now. And maybe the church wouldn't be seen as a place, a group of people that represents judgment, shame, condemnation. A group of people that is for their community. Let's pray together. God, we're grateful that you love us. We're grateful that you are for us, that you offer us forgiveness, that you offer us freedom from shame, that we don't have to work to earn your love or approval. God, would you help us to recognize our limitations? Help us to recognize when we can't see the whole story. Help us to be the kind of people who are slow to form judgments, who are slow to jump to conclusions, people who represent peace and wisdom, the voices of unity in our families, in our communities, and in our churches. God, help us to be the kind of people that you want us to be, that you have invited us to be.